It is a pleasure to be here with all of you, and what a wonderful celebration you are having in Morristown for Lafayette's visit. So I'm delighted to be a part of it. And I also always like tag teaming with Alan Hoffman. We've done this a few times before where he covers the slavery part and I do all the rest of the stuff. So okay. So Lafayette's championship of the anti-slavery movement was only one of the several human rights causes that he espoused during his lifetime, as you have heard. In the years preceding the French Revolution, he lobbied for the restoration of civil rights to French Protestants, and he was largely responsible for the gains in their status in the late 1780s. Lafayette had been baptized a Catholic and was, as one of his biographers notes, named after half a dozen Catholic saints. He had married in a Catholic church to a devout Catholic who raised their 3 children as Catholics. But like his friends Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, Lafayette subscribed to a deist philosophy, a belief in God based on reason rather than revelation or the teaching of any specific religion. Lafayette certainly knew his French history and would have known the story of the French Huguenots and the Edict of Nantes that had granted them as Protestants special privileges under King Henry IV. But that was then revoked by Louis XIV less than a century later. But Lafayette did not fully comprehend the predicament of French Protestants. Lafayette's serious interest in the welfare of Protestants began when he brought the 14-year-old orphaned son of an American Army chaplain back with him from America in 1784 to complete the boy's schooling in France. There were problems at the boarding school where he was enrolled because of his Protestant beliefs. The school was willing to make some concessions because of Lafayette's stature, but it showed Lafayette firsthand the problems faced by Protestants who had no legal standing in France. As Lafayette described it to Washington in a letter of May 11, 1785, quote, "Protestants in France are under intolerable despotism. Although open persecution does not now exist, yet it depends upon the whim of king, queen, parliament, or any of the ministers. Marriages are not legal among them. Their wills have no force by law. Their children are to be bastards, their parsons to be hanged. I have put it into my head to be a leader in that affair and to have their situation changed. It is a work of time and some danger to me," end quote. Lafayette joined forces with other proponents of rights for French Protestants, but they had to move carefully. As Lafayette wrote to his friend John Jay in 1787, "So far are we from religious freedom that even in asking for tolerance, we must measure our expressions." Finally, Lafayette was able to introduce a petition to the French Assembly of Notables for the king to consider restoring rights to French Protestants. Thanks in large part to Lafayette's efforts, on November 19, 1787, the king at last approved some limited rights for Protestants, including the following. Marriages were to be regarded as valid, and the children of these marriages legitimate. The dead could be legally buried, but only in designated places. Protestants could own property, but continued to be restricted in the businesses and professions they could follow. They could worship privately, but public ceremonies were not allowed. So a limited victory, but a victory nonetheless. And these efforts helped pave the way for the reforms of the French Revolution, which granted religious freedom to Protestants, Jews, and other non-Catholics. In fact, Lafayette played a role in advancing the cause of rights for France's Jewish population, which numbered about 40,000. In December of 1789, the National Assembly passed a decree declaring that Protestants could hold office in the French government, but implying that Jews did not. The Jews of Bordeaux, whose families had been in France for generations and who had previously had the right to vote, petitioned the National Assembly to establish that they still retained voting rights. In early 1790, a motion to confirm Jews as citizens with voting privileges sparked heated debate. After a roll call vote in which Lafayette's yes vote was greeted with cheers from the galleries, the motion passed 374 to 224. This bill applied only to the Jews of southern France, not to the Jews of Paris or those living in the formerly German areas of Alsace and Lorraine. The Parisian Jews argued that they had supported the revolution from the beginning, and more than 100 were members of the National Guard, which Lafayette headed. Lafayette allowed his name and rank as Commandant General to be used in a public statement of support for the rights of citizenship for the Jews of Paris and in eastern France, but still full citizenship for these Frenchmen was several years away. Okay, great. Lafayette was also a friend to Indigenous Americans dating back to the American Revolution, when he was instrumental in establishing an alliance with the Six Nations in 1778. He was especially well regarded by the Oneidas, who gave him the honorary name Keula and agreed to send 50 Oneida warriors to fight alongside him against the British in the spring, and that's of 1778. Accordingly, in May that year, after a 250-mile journey, 47 Oneida warriors arrived in Valley Forge in time to join Lafayette's detachment of 2,200 men, which was very nearly trapped by the British at Barren Hill, just outside Philadelphia. Serving as scouts and rear guard, the Oneidas were able to help warn Lafayette that he was in danger and then engage the enemy long enough to allow Lafayette's men to complete their escape across the Schuylkill River. The last to make the dangerous river crossing were the Oneidas. Between 4 and 6 Oneida warriors lost their lives in fighting that day. Next slide, please. A plaque commemorates them in the cemetery of St. Peter's Lutheran Church on Barren Hill, which is, of course, today called Lafayette Hill. Lafayette returned to America in 1784 after the war ended. During this visit, he helped negotiate with the Six Nations at Fort Stanwix near Rome, New York, over access to lands in Western New York. Lafayette, although an unofficial negotiator, had more success with the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Confederacy than the official congressional commissioners. As one witness reported, Monsieur de Lafayette has their confidence and attachment to an extraordinary degree. Those who had already seen him were very eager to see him again. They had transmitted their enthusiasm to their friends and seemed proud to wear around their necks the presents that he had given them in the past. And as James Madison wrote to Thomas Jefferson, James Madison was there also. Both Lafayette and James Madison were unofficially there. But Madison wrote to Jefferson, quote, "During this scene and even during the whole stay of the Marquis, he was the only conspicuous figure. The commissioners were all eclipsed. All of them probably felt it." Next slide, please. Among the other Haudenosaunee leaders at Fort Stanwix were the Seneca chiefs, John Becica, who is more popularly known as Corn Planter, and who Lafayette had met him in 1778 at Johnstown. And then Segoyawatha, who, next slide please, who is Red Jacket. Lafayette was much impressed with the eloquence of Red Jacket, calling his speech against the treaty, quote, a masterpiece of oratory. Cornplanter, on the other hand, felt that his people would benefit most by friendship with the United States. And of course, that's what ultimately happened. The commissioners and the Americans had the advantage. No real surprise. Lafayette also made connections at Fort Stanwix with two Haudenosaunee youths and offered to take them back with him to France to receive the European education. The younger boy, Kayan Leha, was an orphaned Onondaga youth who would live with the Lafayette family in Paris. The older boy, Peter Ossiquet, was half French, half Oneida, and he would not join Lafayette until 1785. And there's some very interesting stories about him and what happened to him. He was invited by Washington to join 51 chiefs and warriors to come to Philly to talk with Washington. And right after they arrived in Philly, Peter Ossiquet died. We're not sure. I couldn't really determine how. Pleurisy has been mentioned. Alcohol has been mentioned. But at any rate, he passed away, and because the 51 chiefs and warriors were in Philadelphia, 10,000 people attended his funeral in Philadelphia, and Thomas Jefferson and all the cabinet was there, because of course Philly was the capital. All the cabinet there were, and Jefferson was there. He wrote to his daughter. He said, remember him from knowing that Lafayette had adopted this young man, and anyway, he told his daughter they buried him standing up, and I think what that means is that he was not in the fetal position, but rather stretched out. Anyway, more to learn about that, but it's a fascinating story. So, during his 1824-25 farewell tour of America, Lafayette made a point of visiting with Native Americans. As a longtime friend to Native peoples, Lafayette was held in high esteem by many tribes. While in Washington, he received delegations of Choctaw and Chickasaw chiefs. In New Orleans, 100 Choctaws were included in a military review honoring him. In Illinois, he left a ball early to visit with the daughter of a chief he had known during the Revolution. In Buffalo, Lafayette was reunited with Red Jacket. In looking at the elderly Indian before him, Lafayette remarked that time had much changed them both. Time has treated you better than me, answered Red Jacket. He has left you with a full head of hair, but I'm completely bald. Well, that was highly amusing to Lafayette and his companions, because all of them knew what Red Jacket did not, was that Lafayette was just as bald, but he was wearing a wig. During his visit to Utica, New York in 1825, Lafayette met the son of Peter Ossiquet, the young man who we were just talking about, who passed away in Philadelphia. When the young man, clamoring for Cayula, Lafayette's Oneida name, literally jumped into his boat as it passed under a bridge on the Erie Canal. Lafayette was especially eager to reconnect with the Oneidas he had known during the Revolution. And while in Utica, made a special request that the Oneida chiefs be invited to meet with him. Among those who responded were three whom he had remembered. They reported that they, quote, sincerely love our white brothers, the Americans, who allow us to live in peace near the bones of our fathers, end quote. Still, the poor treatment of indigenous Americans was a topic much discussed by Lafayette and his traveling companions. His farewell tour secretary devoted several pages in his journal to detailing injustices meted out by Americans to their indigenous neighbors. In his travels through Georgia and Alabama, Lafayette was escorted by bands of Muskogee Creek Indians. His encounters with the Creeks were particularly moving. When Lafayette crossed the river into Alabama, he was on Creek lands, and there was some tension between the Creek leaders and the official Alabama delegation about who was his host. Alabama was only 6 years old as a state, and the preparations to welcome Lafayette had completely depleted the state treasury. Lafayette settled the matter by going first with who mobbed George Washington Lafayette as he emerged from the ferry, dancing and leaping about him and touching his hands and clothing. When Lafayette disembarked, next slide, please, Chief Chili McIntosh greeted him, saying that his people were happy to be visited by one who never made distinctions of blood and color, and calling Lafayette the father dear to all races of men who inhabited the continent. After McIntosh's welcome, the male Indians surrounded Lafayette, placing their arms on his in turn as a token of friendship. Lafayette spent time with the Creeks watching ball games in his honor, visiting in their homes and schools. Other parties of Creeks assisted Lafayette as he left their territory, taking him by the hand and calling him several things: White Father, envoy of the Great Spirit, and the great French warrior. In the late 1820s, Lafayette stepped in to help a group of Osages who had traveled to France in 1827, where they were initially treated as celebrities and were even presented to King Charles X. Later, as interest and the support of their sponsors waned, the Osages were left destitute and wandering. There have been three small books were written about them when they got to France. So they were really celebrated at first, but then they were just sort of left to their own devices. In 1829, the 6 Osages split into 2 groups, 3, with one group going south to Montauban, France, where they were aided by the people there to return home. The other group, including Big Soldier and Sacred Son, next slide, or Mohango. This is a wonderful portrait by Charles Bird King of Mohango and her daughter, who had been born during the trip. She was born in Belgium. She gave birth to twins, and the other child girl was adopted in Belgium. When Lafayette heard, so they ended up, they ended up in Paris. When Lafayette heard about their plight, he brought the Osages to his home, raised money for their passage back to America, and when their belongings were seized at the dock before sailing, he helped straighten out the problems, even returning items to them in America. Before they left, Lafayette gave Big Soldier a bronze medallion with a likeness of himself that Big Soldier wore until his death in 1844. So I'm going to ask for the next image. These are 2 wonderful engravings that were done in France of the Osages. They're just absolutely beautiful. I'm not sure that they're divided into the 2 groups that they actually divided into, but these are really quite beautiful, as is the previous one. That actually, the Charles Bird King, many of his paintings were destroyed in the Smithsonian. There was a fire, and the original of that, it was destroyed. So it's great that we have it. Now we're going to segue. Lafayette, let's go ahead and get the next slide up. Lafayette has actually been called by one historian a proto-feminist, and indeed he did support women's causes and was a supporter of a number of prominent women writers and reformers of this day, including Germaine de Stael, who is on the screen, the daughter of Protestant financier Jacques Necker, with whom Lafayette joined forces to lobby for civil rights for Protestants in the years preceding the French Revolution. Next slide, please. Actually, I should say, about Germain de Stael. They were extremely close friends, Lafayette, and she wrote him he wrote her one of the most poignant letters after his wife Adrienne passed away. He wrote to her and he said, you know, I'm doing okay. I'm not dissatisfied with my life, my excellent children, but Adrienne had to have died for me to know which part of myself would cease to live. And it was very, very big letter. They were extremely, extremely close. So this is another close friend of Lafayette's. This is the Scottish reformer Francis Wright.
And there was Luciano.
Lafayette
Luciano
admired her account of her travels in America in 1821 and invited her to visit him at Lagrange, his home outside of Paris, where they became almost inseparable. Lafayette supported her anti-slavery venture, which was based on his. Hers was in America. It was in Neshoba, which is right outside Memphis, Tennessee, in a low-lying wilderness. It was not a very healthy place to have that. This was in the 20s. So Lafayette helped her by serving as a trustee and by providing funds. He continued to support her despite her radical views, but he knew she would not make much headway. Judge you the success she will have in the United States, he wrote to a relative. She preaches to them about the reform of society in which she sees only three fundamental evils: religion, property, and marriage. Okay, and finally now, I'd like to note that Lafayette was against both solitary confinement and the death penalty. During his visit to Philadelphia in 1824, he was taken to visit the new prison then under construction, the Eastern State Penitentiary. I'm sure many of you have been there. The prison was one of the earliest to be built around the idea of cell blocks radiating from a central core, with the prisoners held in solitary confinement. Despite the enthusiasm of his hosts for the new design, Lafayette felt compelled to let them know that he had spent a year in solitary confinement during his 5-year captivity by the Austrians between 1792 and 1797. Let's have a slide. Yes, that's Lafayette in his prison cell at Olmutz prison. He told them, this is what he told the people in Philadelphia who were so keen on their design. He told them he believed it was necessary to have experienced solitary imprisonment to judge it properly, and that it was said to be conducive to madness. As for the death penalty, speaking to the French Chamber of Deputies in 1830, years after the excesses of the French Revolution, which he had witnessed, Lafayette said, "I shall ask for the abolition of the punishment of death until I have the infallibility of human judgment demonstrated to me." I can read that again. I probably stumbled over it. I'll just read it to you one more time. I shall ask for the abolition of the punishment of death until I have the infallibility of human judgment demonstrated to me. So this quote became very well known. In fact, it was adopted as the motto of a serial called The Hangman in Boston in 1845, and it appears in the masthead at the top. So for Lafayette, all these actions were the logical extension of those ideals which had brought him to America in the first place. The quote in my title today, "A Sanctuary for the Rights of Mankind," is a reference Lafayette made to America when he addressed Congress in 1784, the Continental Congress. And although he wrote eloquently about the meaning of America for humanity, perhaps nowhere are these ideals better expressed than in the beautiful passage written by the 19-year-old Lafayette to his wife during the voyage, toward the end of the voyage in 1777. Slide, please. "The welfare of America," he had said to her, he wrote to her, "I trust that for my sake you will become a good American." Then he wrote, "The welfare of America is intimately connected with the happiness of all mankind. She will become the respectable and safe asylum of virtue, integrity, tolerance, equality, and a peaceful liberty. This is a message that we need now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Appreciate it. Are there one or two questions? Lauren?
Did any of Lafayette's children follow along with his trying to
You know, that's a very good question. Certainly his son, George Washington Lafayette, was involved with the anti-slavery movement. And I believe two of his sons may have also worked for it. I don't know much beyond that. Now, maybe you do. But
did any of them follow through with women's rights?
he had three daughters. He had two kids. One died in infancy, but he had two living daughters. And I'm not sure. Not sure about how they operated there too.
Thank you.
Good questions.
This gentleman had a question?
Yes, great. One. Yes, thank you. When Lafayette was in America, did he communicate in English?
With Adrian? Oh, okay. Absolutely, he did. Can you imagine what those mails were like during the American Revolution? He was always lamenting that he wasn't getting any letters and, they weren't coming and, and he tried everything. He wrote to her from various places and sent it. He sent it on official ships. He tried very hard to be able to talk back and forth with her, to write back and forth, but it's, a number of those letters,
That's not the question.
He was asking about English. Did they communicate in English?
I'm sorry.
He communicated in English when he was in America.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, actually, I think your question was interesting to begin with, so. Lafayette could write in English and he learned English. He learned it rather quickly. And, he got by well, I think.
So he learned it when he was over in America.
He partially learned it on board the ship coming over. He said that, that he was busy with English lessons and seasickness on
He didn't learn it on the internet.
So, he didn't use Google Translate either, so.
So he was not fluent? He was not very fluent?
Well, he was eventually.
Eventually.
But yeah, he was. He could communicate. He didn't, he didn't lack for being able to communicate. So,
Is there one more question for Diane before we break for lunch? Back to the back.
When the Oneida and the Tuscarora sided with the Americans, did Lafayette have any positive influence in trying to get the other four Iroquois confederacies joined or not?
that's a very good question. He knew, of course, of what the Oneidas and Tuscaroras, that they were the two of the Iroquois Confederacy who decided with the Americans. I don't know that he, and of course, Corn Planter and Red Jacket were Seneca. And I think that, I don't know how much he tried to, I don't know that he had a lot of influence in that earlier period where they made those decisions to side with the British, but he certainly knew about that. Alan, do you want to elucidate?
Just to add this one note to that, one of the things he said in 1784 to the entire group at the Treaty of Fort Stanwix negotiations is that I told you during the American Revolution that you should have sided with the Americans. So when he was there up in state of New York in 1778. I think he was trying to tell all the Iroquois Confederates that they should join the American force. But like, obviously, he didn't have great success in doing that.
Thank you, that's right, just
Yeah.
good.
And we have to wait till after lunch.
Yeah, I can't ask a question after lunch.
Well, sure you can. You can do it over a conference. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed the first session. Please give a round of applause to Alan Hoffman. We've had some delicious lunches for you. I will remind you what the selections were, so you can easily get them in just a moment. They were chicken salad with walnuts on a croissant, or salade niçoise with tuna, or the vegetarian option, which was a French country salad. Now, I ask you to return here at 12:30. It's 5 to 12 right now. And in order to get your lunches, you're going to proceed through the door in the large room I'm in now. Those of you in the overflow room, you will have to come into this large room. You're going to proceed through that door right there where Barb is standing. And these choices are like this. If you go to your left, there's all the chicken salads, and they were the heavy hitter today. So there's a lot of chicken salads. If you look to the right, are the salade niçoise and the French country salad, and they will be marked too. So you will proceed through there and go out the door there. And there's choices to sit. You can come back here. There is a small snack bar right down the corridor here. There's a bench out front. There's some benches here, wherever you can find a good place to sit. So we'll see you at 12:30. Thank you for your attention this morning.
That's always such a tough down. And now here. Here's this. Now sharing sound. Yeah. But you needed. Wow.
Never know.
I know, I didn't. You know how.
And we have other expectations. Yeah.
And welcome back to the second half of our symposium. I hope you enjoyed your delicious lunch from the artist's favorite. Like that, she has a small shop on Katana Street, which is the block behind the old Century 21 building. And by the way, I hope you found your little surprise in there. You especially ordered these. These are French. They are known in France as les biscuits du macaron. Very different from the macarons I had in Asbury Park, which were delicious, but these have a nice inner layer. We specifically had them made in blue, white, and red, which are the colors of what? Thank you, and then also red, white, and blue. So I hope you do enjoy these. This is a very special part of our panel, because now you have the opportunity to pose your questions, anything at all about Lafayette to three recognized experts. And in just a moment, we're going to have a little introduction, although you've seen their bios on the program. But before I do that, I would like to formally introduce one of the men who has made this all possible. Our MC is the gentleman from the American Friends of Lafayette, who has spearheaded this whole farewell tour. So he's been on the road from August of last year. Actually, that's really a misnomer because the event started in August. But he's been on the road a long time before that to go out and meet various people who were going to be participating in the farewell tour. I've gotten to know him, over the past 2 years. And I must tell you, he's a real friend of Morristown. He likes Morristown a heck of a lot. He's a man of infectious enthusiasm and boundless energy, and I am so happy that he is here today. So please join me in a Morristown welcome for the estimable Chuck Schwam.
Thank you. And we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Wendy York, so we really should give her a stand. Okay, so I'm going to introduce all the panelists. First panelist here is my boss, right here, the president of the American Friends of Lafayette, maybe my closest friend in the entire world. And I'm not going to have him introduce himself because you've already heard from him today, okay? On the other end, down there, we're going to treat this like a sandwich, like an Oreo cookie here, is Diane Shaw. You also heard from her, a very dear friend, was the curator at Lafayette College and very, very knowledgeable about Lafayette. We'll be hearing from her in the Q&A in the near future. But it's the three people in the center that you haven't met yet. The first person I'd like to introduce is the gentleman in the place over here. His name is, what is your name?
You're supposed to be my best friend.
His name is John Becica, and John Becica is somebody that the American Friends of Lafayette can count on as a wonderful researcher. He wrote a great book, which I'm sure he's going to tell us about. And John, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to talk about yourself.
Now?
Yeah,
This is my book.
hold on.
Is it on? It's on. This is my book. It's 102 stories passing around about what happened to Lafayette on his triumphal tour. You can take a look. Its first printing is run out. I hope to have another printing available by October. It's being sold by the Lafayette Alliance in LaGrange, Georgia. Unfortunately, it is they lost their website. It got hacked. But by October, it should be available for purchase again. I am a graduate of Lafayette College. At my 30th reunion, this young lady next to me gave a wonderful talk about the Marquis de Lafayette. Not much of which had been said when I was a student, and it got me going, and I joined the American Friends of Lafayette, and here I am. There are two things I would want you to walk away from today knowing. Number one, we honor Lafayette because of he was a great Revolutionary War hero, and without him, we would have lost the revolution. There is no historian that I have found who disagrees with that. Without the French, we would have lost. And without Lafayette going back to the middle of the revolution and haranguing his king and the ministers to send more troops and ships and money, we would have lost. Your lunch would have been fish and chips. But even more important is what this seminar is about today, that he was a great humanitarian in all different kinds of things. And I want to read you something. When I give a talk about him, this is what I say. During his farewell tour, he went out of his way to personally visit and greet various minorities, including Native Americans and people of color. He was a staunch abolitionist, defended the rights of French Protestants and Jews during the French Revolution, and supported the national emancipation movements of the people of Ireland, Poland, Italy, Greece, and South America. Plus, he supported the ideas and causes of women. All issues relative in our world today.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. And his book is, sorry about that, if I just make you all joke there. His book is fabulous. I like the way it's very well written. It's on a personal level. It's not too scholarly, and I highly recommend you check it out in October. All right, next, Mr. Becica, we have Leslie Bramlett. Now, I've seen Leslie perform before. She performed for us in September of 2024 to commemorate Lafayette's bicentennial to Philadelphia, and she is portraying Hannah Till today, and I'd like her to say a few words, please.
Hello, I am so honored to be here. I love doing this work. I'm here specifically to portray Hannah Till, but to reinforce the idea that history is made by everyday people, making it every day. Today you are making history, and that everything we do counts, and every story is worthy to be told and heard. We find Hannah in the Revolutionary War papers that Washington meticulously and very professionally keeps. It said that he cared about nothing more than those papers except Martha Washington. On his deathbed, he's worried about those papers. And there's a reason for it, not just for his legacy, but this is where we find all kinds of people. We find Hannah Till in those papers. We find the deal that he makes, that Washington makes with Parson Mason to have Hannah freed after a certain term of service. She's leased to the Army, and then she is freed after she works a certain term. Her son is born in Valley Forge. Isaac Worley Till is born free, and that documentation is found because the Presbyterian church that they belong to actually christened him. So we know that these people existed, and we piece together their lives the best way that we can. But knowing that Hannah was personal chef to George Washington's household during the Revolutionary War, and that she spent 6 months with Lafayette. She gives an interview toward the end of her life. As we've heard, there were several abolitionist papers that got kind of hold of the fact that Lafayette was visiting, and they ran with it. So they found different enslaved people to interview. And Hannah Till does this interview. And in it, you can read between the lines. Some of it is just you can tell she adored Lafayette. She talks about General Washington and said, well, he was, a moderate, and he chuckled with his peers and things like that. And then when it gets time to Lafayette, like, So handsome, so tall. The first thing I thought was it Washington tall? But it is, you can tell that they were friends. There is also evidence of a letter that Lafayette writes because he wants to pay Hannah's, who he calls Aunt Hannah, he wants to pay her mortgage because she's fallen on hard times. I know how historians are. I am one of their lot, but you cannot find where it actually happened. But you can find the letter that he wanted to do it. And what I say is, that is enough for me. That is enough for me. He wanted to do it. He made the plans to do it. However, it wasn't executed or was, does not matter to me. What I also know is that Hannah passes away the year after he leaves. She passes away in 1826. So perhaps by the time they got to it, she was already gone. Doesn't matter. The letter exists. They wanted to do it. And so I'm here representing the great Hannah Till, because it is just important to me that all stories be heard.
He cooked for George Washington and Lafayette, which was a very important thing to be doing back then. You know, people would love to poison these people. And
We're gonna get to the Q&A in a minute, okay? We're gonna get to the Q&A in a minute. John, somebody get a gag for John. Okay, so next I'd like to introduce Pat Sanftner. Pat, you're representing a Quaker woman. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yes, interestingly enough, I am a Quaker, and the Quakers, particularly in New Jersey, are very influential in the abolition movement, in that one John Woolman, who I'm portraying his daughter, who lived in Cherry Hill, was very influential. He was an itinerant preacher and would go on foot from place to place because he believed that it was important to find out how other people were thinking, to try to convince them through quiet listening and understanding that perhaps the enslavement of human beings was a mistake and something very against their faith. Their faith is that the light of God is within all men. If you enslave a man, you are enslaving God. And that logical conclusion is slavery is wrong. John Woolman sadly died in 1771. His work, though, was not done. And by 1773, the Quaker faith made a ruling out of Philadelphia, not far from his home, that if you have slaves, you have a choice. You either manumission and leave them to their freedom, or you leave the faith. So he was very influential, not only here in the United States, but he traveled to England to say the same message and was very influential there too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we start the Q&A, I want to introduce somebody in the crowd today that's very important to the American Friends of Lafayette. She does a lot for Alan especially, but me as well. A board member, somebody we can count on all the time for so many things. Jan O'Sullivan, I want to say thank you to Jan. The reason I bring up Jan is she was a big part of this project I'm going to ask our president about. My first question, Mr. President, is what project have you been working on other than the bicentennial that involves possibly going further, going past 2025 for people who want to learn about Lafayette? You ask President up in the microphone, please.
Certainly. It's on.
Well, some years ago, it was 2022. We got approached by can you hear me, by the way? we got approached by a production company to work on a virtual travelogue of Franklin and Lafayette in Paris. And they were going to apply to the embassy for funding. The embassy gives grants. And one of the enticements for us is that Iris DeRode is involved in this project. Those of you who know Iris, she's a wonderful historian, also quite beautiful. But in any event, we said we will be involved if you change the title to Lafayette and Franklin Sparrows, which they agreed to do. But we didn't get that grant. But through that relationship, we started applying for grants. We got grants in 4 states, and we produced 8 virtual travelogues. There are 3 in New York State, 3 in Virginia, 1 in New Hampshire, and 1 in North Carolina. And they're all up on our website, but it's an app. And there are a total of about 150 stories about Lafayette stops on the farewell tour. I have some what are called rack cards. So to get on the app, there's a QR code. When this started, I didn't know what a QR code was, what an app was, really. I certainly didn't know what a geotag is. But anyhow, I recommend it to you, but if you just want to do it at home, you can do it on your computer by just going on either of the 2 AFL websites.
It's very well illustrated, it's very well orated. If you're on your phone and you're near a site that Lafayette was at, your phone will buzz and automatically start telling you about what's happening. I mean, I'm very impressed that he was able to pull this off. Because it's very technical, it's very impressive, so thank you, Alan. I'm gonna ask one more question to the panel, and then I'm gonna open it up, okay? I want to ask Diane Shaw a question that I've always kind of wanted to ask her. And she's curator of the American Friends of Lafayette, but she also was curator and in charge of special collections at Lafayette College. And my question to you, Diane, is all the things that you've obtained at Lafayette College, what was your favorite Lafayette item you ever received or went after?
You know, that is just a wonderful question. Let me into the mic. That's a wonderful question, and it was something that I felt very fortunate to be able to do. When I first got to Lafayette back in 1985, there were no budget funds for adding things to the collection, and a little bit, but over time, we had a director who wanted to treat us like an academic department and gave us that kind of a budget, which was great. And so I got to buy all kinds of things, and I bought lots of memorabilia. I'm just thinking that one of the last things I bought, which was quite unique, I bought a copy or the copy of Lafayette's arrest warrant, which was signed by Robespierre and others. And the question, the little bitty story about it is that it had a couple of locales associated with it in France. And I was wondering if this was the only one. And I spoke to one of the Lafayette historians who is a member of the AFL and asked him if this could be the only one, or did we think there were more? And he thought that there were more, which allowed for a very substantial drop in price. So I felt like a wonderful piece and a wonderful price. But it was just joyful to be able to buy snuff boxes and clothing and of course books and maps and
And his sword.
and this, well, we had the sword.
I know, but the sword's my favorite.
The sword is truly wonderful. So we had a wonderful collection, and I hope you all will be able to see
Yeah,
it.
you should, if you want to go by Lafayette College and see the collection, we can help you with that at AmericanFriendsOfLafayette@gmail.com, okay? So let's open things up to the audience, to our panelists. Can we have a question over here?
Yeah, give us a first question. I have a question for all of you. And your answer has to come from your heart. We all know the answer, but I want to hear how. And when Lafayette got the news in 1799 that Washington had passed away, just give us a sense.
Did everybody hear that question? Okay, good.
Well, I'll start since I'm holding the mic and, one of the things that kind of broke my heart was learning that, Napoleon would not allow Lafayette to attend the memorial services in France for Washington. And I thought that was a real tragedy. So that's what I associate with that news.
Well, I look back, Lafayette and George Washington had this father-son relationship. Lafayette was an orphan. He lost his father before he was 2 years old, so he never knew his father. His mother died when he was 12 or 13. And on the other hand, Washington had no biological children of his own. He inherited some marriage. But I look back to the last time they saw each other when Lafayette was here in 1784, he was leaving. And they both kind of know they're going to see each other again. That's what I look back to. Because I'm sure Lafayette was devastated.
Okay, so this is an odd question for me as an African American. This history was not my favorite. And so when you talk about from the heart, it's a little difficult when I'm thinking about George Washington and folks like that. But I have made my peace with this history, and your question brings to mind the fact that I think that George Washington, at the end of his life, paid in. This is my opinion, that it is supported by some historians, but I think he showed his real affection for Lafayette by his will, and the fact that he does end up freeing the enslaved people that he can free. If you do not know his relationship with Lafayette, then you don't understand why that happens. Like, it just seems like, okay, he was an enslaver for all of his life, and his father before him an enslaver, and all of a sudden he dies and he frees who he can free. Why? Lafayette and that relationship and being able to connect those dots. So even though Lafayette couldn't be a part of his life, couldn't come and honor him the way he would want to, his lasting impression on him is unmistakable.
An interesting question from my point of view. Certainly George Washington is someone to be respected in so many ways. Certainly the idea of slavery is not something that I particularly respect in any way. And the idea that a young man could have an influence on a great man in that way, and that that young man in turn becomes a great man from their association, is a very special and unique story of the American history beyond the Revolution.
Want to follow up on what I think John said. In 1784, when they parted, the exchange of letters were extremely affectionate. And one thing that you realize is how affectionate the soft side of Washington, and Lafayette, how he was towards Lafayette. And Lafayette, through his charm, amiability, character, brought that out of Washington. It was really quite special. You know the story, I'm probably screwing it up, but I think it was Gouverneur Morris and someone else made a bet. I bet you can't put your arm around Washington, stuff like that. So one of them did it, and Washington gave them an icy stare. He is known as a total cold fish. But with Washington, with Lafayette, he was just the opposite, which I think is remarkable. So that's what I think of, and I think Lafayette, of course, was sad, very sad at the time of Washington's death.
And let me just say, and I'll just really briefly, the reason I'm standing here is because of that relationship. I did a deep dive on George Washington, and I saw this one man that he treated differently, that penetrated that force field, that veneer that Washington had around him. And I just gotta echo what Alan said. That's what really made me about Lafayette. That relationship was so special, and I never read about it before. And I'm standing here because of that. All right, next question. Go
You
ahead.
could only imagine history, how it would be if there was no Lafayette or if they never met.
Yeah, I think John's fish and chips comment might.
There we go. And talking about food, my other question was, earlier you were mentioning about the cook. She cooked for George Washington and Lafayette. And I wanted to know how long she lived with her cooking. What age did she pass away at?
Hannah? Well, she would have been over 100 years old when she passes away, if the records, but she was very well in elder. She actually is a pastry chef. She's a specialist. So her cooking is renowned. When she settles after the Revolutionary War in Philadelphia, she continues to cook for families. This is how she makes her living. She spent 6 months with Lafayette, but she's with Washington for 7 years. She travels with him and she cooks for his household. So during the winter encampments, all of the generals, their wives, and his household, she's doing the cooking for all the dignitaries and guests. And as my friend started to say, it is because of the espionage, because of the fact that it would be really easy to poison George Washington and all of his guests. This is why he makes that deal to have her freed, because how else can he guarantee her loyalty? And her husband also gets the same deal, even though they have two different enslavers. Isaac Till and Hannah Till end up being freed and establishing their family in Philadelphia afterwards. But that is due to George Washington's deal with their enslavers so that they can cook for him and he can eat his food in peace.
Yeah, but it's interesting, that's another negative to slavery, and that's having leverage. He had leverage over them, so.
But not just them, their descendants. Isaac Burley Till is born free the winter of 77-78 at Valley Forge, because the law says that the child follows the condition of the mother. Once the mother is free, then all of the children are free.
Was she here in Morristown in that horrible winter of 1770?
She was with them. She is leased to the army July 76 when New York falls to the British, and she is with them the rest of the time.
Okay, next question. Yes, sir.
Which would be both encampments in Morristown, not only 1779, but 1780, but also 1777.
Lived in the house.
Morristown.
Alan, I understand you did your own translation of Lavassier's outwardly the Grand Tour. What did you find was different in your interpretation than what previous translations had been?
That's a little bit of a softball, but I'll answer. So there were two translations that were made in 1829, the same year that the book was published. One was a Philadelphia translation by Dr. John Godman, who was actually a pretty famous guy. He was one of Charles Wilson Peel's son-in-laws. Very accomplished man. The other one was done in New York. So I wasn't really aware of these translations when I started, but I did become aware of it as I was working on mine. And when I finished the first draft, which by the way, since I don't type this in handwriting, I have a sheet of papers that big, which I still have. Jan O'Sullivan will know that I can't. Yeah, but yeah. But so I called Diane Shaw. I said, I want to come down and look at your archive, and I want to look at the other 2 translations, which I did. And Lafayette College has a wonderful collection. And I determined that number one, neither one of them were complete. The Godman translation, which is available online, has been for several years, is, I would say, substantially incomplete. It has none of the speeches except the final speech of President Adams in Lafayette when Lafayette left in September. And neither one of them has any of the 13 illustrations that are in the original French book, nor the route map. We had the route map kind of cleaned up and we republished it. So it's a fold out at the back of my translation, which even though the original volume was 2 volumes, it's in 1 volume. I have to tell you a quick story now that I see my wife is not here. I found this book. I was at the Rattle Bookshop and it was in their rare book section on the 3rd floor, and they brought it down from the top shelf. They sat me at a round table. They dusted it off, and I opened tome 1, volume 1, and I read the preface. I said, "My God, I can read this." I hadn't used my French. I took 6 years of French. My mother collected all of my report cards, kept them. I got all A+ in French, except one where she didn't have it. I don't know what happened. She screwed up. She missed 1 mark. But anyhow, so I bring it home. My wife is more fluent in French than I ever was. She speaks it. She's a member of the French club. I said, "Look what I bought." She knew my interest in Lafayette. She opens it up and she says, "It's in French. What are you going to do?" Then she says, "I hope you're not going to ask me to help you. I've got a life." No, I'm going to do it myself. It'll be my project, and it was. But anyhow, it was, as I say in the preface, it was a labor of love. It took me 2 years to. I was a practicing lawyer, so I did it on evenings and weekends. 2 years to actually write it out, and another year to get it typed, and another year to get it published.
Thank you, Alan.
Question for Ms. Shaw. Is there a finding aid online to the Lafayette College collection?
Could you repeat the question, please? So that you-
Yeah, I think the question is there a finding guide to the holdings at Lafayette College online? Yes, there is. Just briefly, the Lafayette collection is divided into several parts based on type of material. There's the book collection. We call it the AFL collection. Because AFL helped us acquire a number of those books were donated. Then there are the manuscripts, and I will say, and this is apropos of the George Washington Lafayette relationship. Lafayette College is privileged to own 150 of the original letters that Lafayette wrote to Washington, mostly during the Revolution. So that is just an aside. The letter that transmits the key to the Bastille is there. The letter that asked Washington to join an experiment to free slaves is there. You know, everything's wonderful. Then there's a fabulous prints and engravings collection, and that's all. They're all scanned, or most of them are all scanned and online. And then there's memorabilia object collections, and that's cataloged maybe not as well as it could be online, but we have good information at the repository. They'd be happy to hear from you, and it just, go to special collections, Lafayette College, and you'll find your way there.
They even have an image library, so if you're looking for an image Lafayette for publication or
Prints and
whatever it may be,
engravings.
they have an image.
And most of those have been put into the public domain by the college, so you're free to use them.
Okay, next question. Yes, sir, right up front.
So I have a two-parter for anybody. Paul Larson, I don't know if Paul's here, but he referred to Lafayette as the first rock star, and most rock stars have multiple farewell tours. So I was wondering about Lafayette's first farewell tour. The second question is about these ocean voyages. I mean, it blows my mind that these guys went back and forth and didn't drown. Someone can talk about what life was really like on those trips they were making back and forth.
He almost did drown, but I'll let them tell you about that.
So, as I said, my father, John Molman, did travel to England in 1771, he made the choice to travel by steerage because he thought to be equal with the sailors in the hold would be better than taking a cabin, which might have been used to fund other things. The ship might have been used to bring dyes to the Americas. And dyes are produced by enslaved people, and he didn't agree with that. So he's traveling by steerage. And it was not fun. And it was a lot of seasickness. He says that he goes and he can, right where the door to the outside was, he would put his face so he could smell the fresh air. So it was particularly horrible. Marquis de Lafayette did not travel by steerage.
One thing about poor Lafayette was he was terribly seasick every time he got on the boat, including at age 19 when he first came over. So it was not a pleasant thing for him to travel across the sea.
The first tour though, when he came back, was it, before?
1784.
1784, I think he spent 2 weeks with George Washington. It was mainly to come back and visit Washington. I think he got to 3 or 4 months in 13 states. But
Didn't he get feted in a few places though?
He got wild. He got exuberant welcomes. By that point, I mean,
I remember this is 1784.
right, and Alan, did you talk about the welcome that he got in 1780 when he came back on the Hermione?
That's what I'm.
Yes, already, he'd only been there for one trip, and people are ecstatic to see him in 1780. So by 1784, they are everywhere, and he's been invited to address Congress, which he does. I mean, he got a royal welcome. That's not the right word. But at any rate.
She misspoke.
Yeah, he was really, well, I was just gonna say, he got the title, some of you have heard him called the hero to the world. A number of books use that as a title. And I believe that was coined in France for him after he returned from that 1784 journey.
Alan, how many times did he cross the Atlantic Ocean?
4 back and forth.
Yeah, so 8.
Let me just supplement. Oh, do you want to talk? No. So in 1784, I think of it as a kind of the prequel to the 1824 farewell tour. He was here for 4.5 months. He was feted everywhere. In addition to what's been said, he got the key to the city of New York. He'd never been to New York because it was under British control. He was made a citizen of Maryland and I believe Virginia, but at least 2 states. And the Maryland citizenship is very interesting because if you run it through to the US Constitution, he was made a citizen, he and his children, his offspring were made a citizen of Maryland. The US Constitution says that if you are a citizen of any of the states at the time of the adoption of the Constitution, you're a citizen of the United States. And I think his family tried to argue that when he was in prison, he was a citizen of the United States. But for whatever reason, the administration wasn't buying it. They were concerned about the international repercussions of this still revolutionary France. And the relationship with Great Britain and the quasi-war between us and France, so they didn't acknowledge that he was. But I think he probably was a citizen of the United States.
I'm wondering why Washington never went to Europe or France.
He only left the country once, that was to go to Barbados.
Why did
His brother was there.
why didn't he go to Europe or France, Lafayette, or
He's pretty busy.
Washington gets off the boat at Barbados and the first person he meets gives him smallpox. And so he spends 28 days really sick. It probably puts him off of international travel. It's like, because he almost dies of smallpox.
But thank God he got smallpox.
Exactly. Tell them what happened with smallpox, what he did for smallpox.
Say again?
Tell them what he did for smallpox.
Well, okay. Washington knows that you can beat smallpox because he almost dies from it. In the early 1700s, American doctors, thanks to an enslaved African named Onesimus, find out about how to treat smallpox. And they develop a smallpox inoculation. By the 1740s, the Boston doctors know about this. By the 1770s, there is an outbreak in Morristown.
Yeah.
And what Washington ends up doing is mandating that his army get inoculated. But Trenton, New Jersey is one of the places where they inoculate those soldiers at the old barracks.
And she's speaking from the old barracks point of view. So if I'm not, Ms. Bowman, I'm Pat Sanftner, and I'm the curator at the Schuyler Hamilton House, where we actually talk about the encampment of 1777. And it's more accurate to say, smallpox was kind of developed upon us, in that George Washington ordered very soon after his arrival that everyone in the army be inoculated against smallpox. Well, Morristown had not expected the army on their doorsteps. The last time they'd heard about them, they'd been in Pennsylvania, and now only a few weeks later, they're on their doorsteps asking to stay for the winter. And how do we support an army of 3,000 souls when we are a town of 300 souls? And it was decided that the army would be dispersed throughout the community. And that's fine. So many homes took in soldiers. If you had an empty field that was fallow, you had a company of men on the field, and that's how they were going to survive. And then George Washington very soon issues this order that everybody be inoculated. Well, it was devastating for the town, because 50 at a time, they were taken to the Presbyterian church, which was made into this inoculation center. And then where were they going to go home that evening to sleep? And although those people who were inoculated had a small case of smallpox where they could survive, they were capable of passing it on as full-blown smallpox. And the town suffered a loss of somewhere between 1/4 to 1/3 of its population as a result of hosting the American Revolutionary Army in 1777. We have hindsight. We know they're coming back again. You can imagine how happy residents were at that prospect.
Because I'm gonna steer us back to Lafayette.
Is that, yes, George Washington did mandate that all of the army be inoculated, but he also had Martha Washington inoculated.
Yeah.
These are the things, the little things that help me make peace with this history, because he does know that you can survive it, but we know, if we don't know anything else, we know he loved Martha Washington. And so to have her inoculated, he's not doing this vicious thing where he doesn't care. They figure out that the thing about inoculation is that you need to quarantine. And this is where the old barracks does take place, the front stage, is that they not only inoculate the soldiers there, but they quarantine them there also.
Since we're on smallpox, shortly after Lafayette is married to Adrienne, he was always looking and positive about new innovations. And his mother-in-law, Adrienne's mother, had recently lost a pregnancy due to she having smallpox. She survived, maybe not. And of course, her husband was upset because it would have been a son, and he didn't have any sons. But he rented a home on the outskirts of Paris. And he and Adrienne's mother went there, and Lafayette had himself inoculated against smallpox. This is before he ever came to the US at age 19. And it had a second positive effect that in close contact with his arranged marriage wife, they became very romantic and they fell in love. So,
Yay, smallpox.
If it wasn't for smallpox in Lafayette, we would have had fish and chips for lunch.
I'm a volunteer tour guide at Ford Mansion at the National Park here in Morristown. And I recently had a French couple on the tour. And they made the comment of, we don't understand why you are also in love with Lafayette. It's not terribly well thought of, France. Can you address that?
I actually was approached via the internet a French school district wants me to train their teachers. We're in talks for doing this. Their curriculum, part of, the way that we teach history and we say, okay, give me one of the reasons for the First World War. And someone will say, the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand. That's one of the reasons for the French. One of the reasons for the French Revolution is that the Americans didn't pay back the money from the American Revolution. And as an American, you don't realize how American you are until you're dealing with things outside of America. And I was stunned and appalled. You actually teach French children? So, no, I don't think he would be a major hero in France, where it's like, you got us involved in this and this is what ended up happening. But it takes some deep breaths to study history outside of your own country to see how people view your country.
Well, on that subject, imagine a nation that is infant nation, that does have resources, but it's trying to rebuild after the war on their soil, and then being resentful for it 200 years later in France. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, how about the other?
So, I would say the principal, but not exclusive reason is Lafayette was a moderate. He was, during that time, he was in favor of a constitutional monarchy, where the ultimate power was in the hands of elected representatives of the people. He antagonized both sides. He antagonized the royalists, who were still in favor of the ancient regime, the old regime, and absolute monarchy. And he antagonized the radicals, who were in favor of a republic. Wentz explains the arrest warrant for him in August of 1792, and is imprisoned for 5 years by the European monarchs. And the French have a long memory. There are still monarchists in France. In 2007, President Sarkozy broke the ice with George W. Bush, and he spoke to a joint session of Congress in 2007. He also proposed that no one was in favor of it, even Lafayette's family, but that Lafayette, and of course Lafayette was front and center whenever there's a state dinner, French state dinner in America. But he proposed that Lafayette's remains be taken from Beechwood Cemetery to the Pantheon with all the other French heroes. And it was highly controversial. In Le Monde, which I think is to the left, someone wrote an op-ed against it, saying it was outrageous that Lafayette was a traitor to the French Revolution when he went over the border, failing to mention that there was an arrest warrant by the radicals, that he would have been guillotined if he didn't. So they have long memories. But on the other side of it, you do a poll in France of the two most popular historical figures. It's Napoleon 1 and Lafayette 2. So who knows?
Bottom line is, during the French Revolution, he tried to keep everybody happy. What happens when you try to keep everybody happy? No one's happy, right? But there was a time when he was the most popular man in France, without fail. So, my questions. I'm going to take this quadrant now for a second, right there.
Yeah, question. You just talked about Lafayette in France. He's very big person in Paris. And my question is, he's buried in American soil in Paris. So was it a choice of his to be buried in France? Or he was simply wanted to be buried in the US and France didn't want that?
But, so the question is, we know he's buried in American soil in France. You can't hear me?
But you have to be recorded, so.
Oh, got it. I'm turning it off, yeah. Okay. So the question was, we know that he's buried in American soil in France. Was that his choice or was it because he couldn't be buried in America, in American soil? And, we know the answer to that question. I'm gonna let the panel answer. I don't want to steal their thunder.
I'm sure that he wanted to be buried beside Avery, yeah.
100%.
So, and she's a big person, she established big groups in the cemetery.
So Adrian established that cemetery because that cemetery is right next door to the pit that they threw her ancestor, her mother and aunt in, and grandmother.
Her grandmother and her aunt.
Right, after they were guillotined. And it took her years to find that pit, right? And she found it and established the cemetery, and Lafayette wanted to be buried with her. Lafayette, did during the battle, I'm gonna let you tell this.
So, historians and biographers are all over the lot. Whether he was buried in American soil, mostly people say yes, but where the soil came from. Mount Vernon, Brandywine, Bunker Hill. So I think the best evidence, actually, Diane herself found this letter, purchased.
We bought a letter.
Bought a letter.
Right.
And it was from a man by the name of William Wood.
I think that's
He
right.
was an American businessman. He grew up in Charlestown, Massachusetts. He was very wealthy, lived in New York City. He had a project. He would go around getting subscriptions for working men's libraries, apprentices' libraries, free libraries. That wasn't that common at that time. He built one in Nahant, Massachusetts. I think he built one in Boston, built one in Manhattan. When Lafayette was here in 1825, he had started with a subscription to build one in Brooklyn. And Lafayette was asked to lay the cornerstone of the Apprentices Library in Brooklyn. That institution, not the same location, became the Brooklyn Museum at some point. But the location is different. But anyhow, they built this library. So he wanted to enlist Lafayette to help him in Europe. I guess they had a conversation. And that letter that Diane found relates to the fact that he had already asked the selectmen of Charlestown to provide a hogshead, which was a big crate of soil to send to Lafayette. The letter was 1829. So I followed that lead in a weekly in Charlestown, Massachusetts called the Bunker Hill Aurora. There are two additional articles. One says that the selectmen agreed to the request, and it comments that now Lafayette will bury it in soil that contains the remains of Joseph Warren, the hero, one of the heroes of Bunker Hill. And the second article, and this is where I lost the trail, says that the Massachusetts Mechanics Association is going to build the crate. So the best thing, the most probable is that was shipped to Lafayette sometime in 1829, 30, and was used at Deepwood Cemetery over its children.
So, and also, if you don't know, flying over his grave is an American flag, which has changed, supposed to be on July 4th. They've been not hitting that mark as of late, unfortunately, but we did it this past June 25th. Pomp and circumstance, American military, French military, we lay a wreath, and it's been going on since the 1930s, 20s.
The American flag flew over Lafayette's grave even during World War II.
Right, even when Hitler was in Paris, that flag was not touched. Okay, let's take a question on this side now. Does somebody have a question over here?
I did, but it was just answered.
Thank you, Carol.
When you were translating the diary, there's really no mention of Morristown. I'm wondering if the secretary was ill that day.
Well, actually, John has an answer for that one, I think. John, do you want to pick that up?
When people talk about this wonderful book that Alan translated, and when I first read it, I was greatly disappointed. Because it turns out that the purpose of Lafayette bringing this secretary was not to have a travel log of everything that happened. The purpose was to talk about how the American experiment was turning out and to send these missives back to France to be published in little bits and pieces. And of course, the people in France really didn't publish this stuff. But because of that, there are huge swaths of the tour, whole states that Levasseur says, we went to New Jersey. I mean, if you read Levasseur about what we're celebrating right now, this week, Bastille Day, where he came through New Jersey and ended up in Philadelphia, there's literally nothing there except we went to New Jersey. So
What about
that's your answer.
the Caldwell incident? Isn't that day?
Yeah.
So what John told me is that is a true statement, what he said, but Levasseur's carriage overturned Caldwell. And he was indisposed for perhaps a day. And maybe that's why he said nothing about it. Is that true, John?
I don't think he was that indisposed that much. Because they would have made a bigger deal about it when they described it.
Well, let's face it, traffic in Caldwell really does.
Was too many huzzas, too many cannons, and too many bells pealing, and the horses bolted, and his carriage.
Although what Alan's book is amazing, we use it as a tool. We also use firsthand accounts as a tool. Newspaper articles are very prevalent because it was such an important time. This tour, everybody wrote about it. We know what he ate, we know what he said, we know what people wore, we know everything without even using this resource. I'm not taking away from this resource, but we also have to use the newspaper articles as our guide. If we're going to recreate an event, it tells us what toasts were said. It's an amazing tool for us. So thank goodness they wrote everything down.
It's even amazing that, the newspapers would publish the speech the official gave when he arrived, whether it was the mayor or somebody from the Society of the Cincinnati or the Masons or whoever. But in addition to that, Lafayette would listen and off the top of his head give a response. And somebody was able to quick write that down and they published that in the newspapers as well.
My next question, Bobby.
My question is actually, Pat had a question before lunch, and I'm curious what her question was.
Well, it was kind of a comment and a question, and it was, remember how we all giggled when that woman that Lafayette supported said that part of the problems, one of the three big issues was marriage. And the fact is that we forget, as 20th century, 21st century people, is that women were indeed property. And as a wife, you were under the control of your husband. He found you uppity. He might prescribe, well, maybe she should be put in an institution. Being a wife was not an easy situation. Some men didn't have that issue, but plenty of them did. And so I just wanted to make comment to the fact that we forget so soon, because after all, women didn't get their rights until just over 100 years ago in this nation. We forget just how bad the situation is.
And the ERA is still not passed.
And the ERA is still not passed. Exactly.
So last night we were drinking at the event, they had Veuve Clicquot champagne, a very nice French champagne. Veuve Clicquot in French means widow club. Lafayette made it possible for this woman to be able to continue operating as a winery after her husband died, because he helped change the law in France that made it possible for women to retain the rights of their homestead, their land, after their men died. So Lafayette was a proto-famicist, as my boss likes to say. Proto-famicist. Okay, next question. Yes, sir.
What I find interesting is how many aristocrats from Europe came to the US to serve in the American Revolution. I mean, you had the Marquis de Lafayette from France, Baron von Steuben in Prussia, and the Polish Kosciuszko and Pulaski. So my question in general, and maybe Lafayette in particular, what drew these aristocrats from their privileged lifestyle to come to a country, fight for a country that really wanted to get rid of at least an inherited aristocracy. Not necessarily hierarchy at all, but at least an inherited aristocracy.
I'll start you off. So one of those was not really, he claimed a title and it wasn't his, which was fun student. But the basics are, it was the age of enlightenment. It was an age of amazing intelligence, where you tried to learn more, where you looked to see what the basic things could be better. And as such, I think there was this overwhelming feeling of possibility. And they saw this nascent little set of colonies as a possibility of a great future. I think they were very prescient. I think they really saw something that maybe we didn't even see. But those men were willing to put their intelligence on the line along with their lives.
I think you can't discount diplomacy. Looking at the great diplomats that Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson were, that I speak as an African American, and sometimes this history, you're like, but I'm still moved by the writings of Thomas Jefferson. And even though the somewhat hypocritical nature of, but you can still see, I cannot imagine reading it in real time, what that must have done to others. And so looking at diplomacy as a tool that the Americans, the new Americans were using, it can't be discounted. You can convince anybody to be on your side if you're smart.
I love both of those answers. I would just also point out that sometimes it had to do with the fact that things were closed in the countries where they lived, and that the opportunity for military glory or making your fortune or your career may have involved the need to go somewhere else to do that. So that's a little bit true of Lafayette. So.
Thank you. So I generally agree with Diane said, but you can't generalize. For example, Lafayette, certainly a major, there's a wonderful biography that no one knows about, but it's called For Liberty and Glory, Washington and Lafayette and Their Revolutions. And so it was a little bit of liberty and it was a little bit glory. That's by James Gaines in Lafayette's part. I think that Kosciuszko was a freedom fighter. He proved it in later years. And in fact, Kosciuszko gets mentioned as an abolitionist in that same appendix that the African-American historian I mentioned it this morning. He honors both Lafayette and Kosciuszko. I think Baron von Steuben was, it was a place for military advancement and military glory. I'm not too sure about the other pole. Baron de Kalb was a French spy in America for about 5 years in the 1760s. He was a close associate of Lafayette's commander when Lafayette was a teenager in vets. He was a professional soldier. I don't know whether he had any lighting views or not. So you can't generalize. It was a mixture of course.
And let's not forget, not everybody that came over was grade A. In other words, when Lafayette came in 1777, at that point, George Washington was getting sick and tired of what Silas Deane was sending over. He was sending over men that just wanted the glory and the money and didn't want to work for it. So they actually said no to Lafayette when he first came because they were sick and tired of the French just coming over for those reasons. I'm not gonna get into why they said yes. I'm sorry, we're gonna close things up. I will say one thing about that question, though. It came in reverse, and that's called the Lafayette escadrille. American men who were very wealthy and living in Paris came to the aid of the French, using Lafayette's name as their guide. So it's one of my favorite tangents about Lafayette. There's so many tangents. Lafayette escadrille, read about it. Wendy, do you want to wrap us up?
Thank you, Leslie. Well, ladies and gentlemen, and so it ends. I'm going to take just one opportunity to acknowledge a few people who made this all happen. I am starting to get emotional now. But in any event, we have had so many volunteers from here. My core team starting out was Pat Sanftner, Bobby Bailey, Julie Dedell, who many of you know, Ryan Dawson, who later became a co-chair, and Bill Maurer, the borough historian from Mendham. We took it to about September. That was high-level planning. Then we started detail planning, and a great thing happened. I met Carol Barkin through Leslie Bensley and Alice Cutler. She's extraordinary. She is a market communications maven. She did all of those. She also took on the events on the green and ultimately the parade. A lot of moving parts there, folks. She did an extraordinary job. Amazing panel today. I mean, truly, these are some of the best people of Florida. There's two other people, well, three other people. First of all, I don't know how many of you know the editor of the Morristown Green here. Extraordinary way. I mentioned to somebody today, a couple of weeks ago, he asked me, did I have a copy of The Hero of Two Worlds by Mike Duncan, one of the primary books on Lafayette. He wanted to learn more. I think this man could be on a panel at this point. And then there's a person too who has helped me as a guide behind the scenes, helped me understand how the historic community works, how to put together really wonderful events. She is an amazing individual, and she helps me in any way I can think. Bobby Bailey. I have to leave it, Dave. This woman's extraordinary too. She has held many leadership positions in the town for all of the historic positions. She was on the board of McCullough Hall, you know, the mayor for the renovation. She currently is the president of the Morristown Greens. Out in the open, behind the scenes, she has been a wonderful guide and mentor for me. So wherever you are, Alice Cutler, thank you very much. But I'm glad to hear there's other things going to be happening. And one of my fellow volunteers over here, Scott Wild, who, by the way, is a direct lineal descendant of Paul Revere. He had a great idea. You know, May 10th this year, Alan talked about the importance of May 10th. It is when, of course, Lafayette arrived in Morristown to tell General Washington the good news that the court of Versailles was sending them millions of dollars and thousands of elite troops. Scott had a great idea. Now it's been heard. Why don't we memorialize it every year? You know, we had this ceremony. It just popped up. It was about 35 minutes. We can have different speakers every year. So we're going to try to make that happen for Morristown. Well, and I told you in the beginning, this man is extraordinary. He, Catherine Peretti too, who has been speaking French from when she was a little baby girl. She was also a good help to me behind the scenes. That sounds wonderful. Chuck really loves Morristown. I mean, he told me that a long time ago, and he told me that his best event in 2025 would be Morristown. Hey. This extraordinary Lafayette reenactor that Chuck Santa said to me just yesterday, Wendy, this was the best event that I have been in among the small areas. You know, it's hard to compete with New York and Philadelphia with what happened there, but for our size, the absolute best event. So that was pretty darn terrific, wasn't it? And so, thank you, everybody. We had extraordinary numbers of volunteers. Many of them aren't here, but where's the Women's Club? Women's Club, raise your hand. Come on, Pop-up museum where there were the Lafayette treasures. Good, I'm glad you all saw this. The house of Dr. Lewis Condit, who, by the way, ladies, you may know this already, Dr. Condit vaccinated his little girl Sophie on the front porch because there was vaccine hesitancy among the population.
Yes.
And you know, I just,
2 years old, she was missed.
and I don't think it was via a syringe, or I said it was cutting something you, yeah, it must have been.
It almost was a riot.
Oh, my goodness gracious. So thank you, everybody, for coming today. Look at the numbers that came here. You know, we had to close out the registration at 70 because of the limitations in this room, the fire marshal. But through the assistance of a number of people and the goodwill of Kevin over here, we were able to open it up. We had 120 boxes of food today. So we went from 70 to 120 in just a couple of days. And this recording today that Darren is making, the head of the library here, it's going to be available to view. It has to be edited, but at some time in the near future, it's going to be on Kevin's website for 5 days. So we'll make sure we get that information out so other people from Morristown and the surrounding areas can see this. Thank you, Kevin, very much for your today. MorristownGreen.com, and all of you who are here, we have your email addresses. We'll send it out to you so you can share the link with other people. So it is the end, and it is conventional among the farewell tour participants in the American Friends of Lafayette to ask a senior leader from the American Friends of Lafayette to close it out. So just as he opened up the events on the green the other day, after Mayor Tim, of course, I'd like to ask Chuck to again take the mic and close out Morristown's events.
One more hand to Wendy York. One more. This was an amazing 2 days, and I never doubted it. There were days that preface this, there's days that are gonna follow this. I have fallen in love with Morristown, your sense of community, your sense of history. Thank you so much. We're heading to Philadelphia, Lafayette's heading to Philadelphia, then Lancaster, then down to Washington, DC and Virginia. If you wanna see where he's going, Lafayette200.org, okay, Lafayette200.org. It is an honor for our panelists. We're gonna close with Viva Lafayette. Thank you.
We were yesterday,